Welcome to Chromatic Counsel podcast, where law, leadership, and color collide. I am your host, Kerry, and I have a great show lined up for you today. I do have a couple of quick announcements before we get started. If you are needing technical credits, technical CLE, be sure to check out the Digital Tells class. There is a link in the show notes below. You can click on it and learn a little bit more about body language and how to read that on Zoom. And the holidays are coming up. So if you or your loved one is looking to find out what season you are you an autumn? Are you a spring or summer or a winter? Then you can go to the website, take a look around, and utilize one of the color services that I have available. But today I have an amazing show lined up for you today. And today, my guest, I am joined by Attorney Mark Astor. He's a powerhouse in both criminal and mental health law. Originally from the UK, Mark began his career as a Palm Beach County Assistant State Attorney, eventually serving as chief of 2 county court divisions and trying everything from misdemeanors to capital murder. Mark's the founder of drug and alcohol attorneys, Astor Simovitch Law, and Baker Act attorneys, all dedicated to protecting individuals and families affected by substance use, mental health disorders, and wrongful detention. Known for taking calls day or night, Mark has built a reputation for being relentless when a loved one's freedom and safety are at stake. And outside the courtroom, he teaches Krav Maga, one of my favorite things next to kickboxing, and champions physical fitness as a foundation for mental well-being. Mark, welcome to the show.
Kerry, good to see you, and thank you so much for having me as a guest. Really good to see you today.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you here. I've been doing a little poking around on your Instagram page, like I told you right before we started the show. But I would love for you to share with the listening audience kind of what inspired that shift, because you went from criminal prosecution into the mental health and addiction advocacy arena. What prompted that?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. So I was prosecutor from 1994 to 1999. I was an intern in 93. And one of the things I realized pretty quickly was there was something wrong with the system. And what I meant by that was kept seeing the same faces over and over and over again. Now, back in the 90s, we didn't have diversionary courts like drug court and mental health court and veterans court. And so if you came back enough times, they just locked you up for as long as they could. So the mandate in the criminal system, even today, is to punish first and to rehabilitate second. Well, if you've got nowhere to put somebody and they've got a behavioral health issue, I mean, we're going to send them to the county jail or we're going to send them to the state penitentiary. And that was sort of my first exposure as a young lawyer. I did, as you mentioned, I did some defense work, quite a bit of defense work, which paid much better than being a prosecutor because I don't pay government lawyers very well, but I didn't really find it as satisfying. And I tried for many years not to practice or make a living and failed miserably at that. About 12 years ago, I ended up working for a company that teaches lawyers about the business side of practicing law. And it's founded by a gentleman by the name of John Robbins. And I had seen him speak at a breakfast meeting, about how to be an entrepreneurial lawyer. And that really resonated with me because I had a father that left school at 14 and a mother that left school at 16. And together they built businesses. Some worked, some didn't. Some made money and some were a bit of a failure. After I saw him speak, I basically begged him for a job. I had really nothing going on in my life. I was pretty close to broke at the time. And I spent a year there working for him, learning about the business side of practicing law. But what I didn't realize when I begged him for the job was that what How to Manage really is, at the very essence, is a personal growth company for lawyers. And they believe and they teach that personal growth must precede financial growth. And there was 2 things. I spent a year working there, and the 2 things I really learned that became really sort of what the motivating factor for me were: number one, I'd failed to take 100% responsibility for my life, both personally and professionally. So on a professional level, I hadn't really done anything to make, to build my career. I mean, that's why I was broke. And on a personal level, I'd gotten married at 34 and divorced at 35, and I hadn't really had anybody special in my life after that. And again, that was my fault. I mean, who would want to be with somebody who really wasn't going anywhere? I was quite a miserable individual at that point.
Mhm.
But after a year there, I said, okay, it's time to go and open up my own law firm. And I had a lot of close family members and friends who had these issues. And I said, okay, I'm going to open up a law firm that helps these people. That will give me some real focus. It'll give me a mission. Um, Now, I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, but having spent all that time in the criminal system, I was aware that people with behavioral health issues, got sucked into the criminal system. And I also read about Florida's Marchman Act, which is a statute that allows us to put somebody into treatment for periods of up to 90 days when there's a primary substance use disorder. Now, at the time, there were only two lawyers who were really using it. One was north of me, and he was a divorce lawyer. And one was south of me, and he sued nursing homes. And the guy that was south didn't go north, and the guy that was north didn't go south. And they kept this little secret called the Marchman Act because, we're making too much money off of this. Don't tell anybody about it. Right. So they were making money. Well, I went onto social media and I started to blab about it. And that did two things. Number one, it really ticked off the guy down south to the point where he went and registered the fictitious name to my website and then started sending me threatening emails that he was going to shut me down. And I said, see you in court. Have fun. The other thing that started to happen was people called me and said, we've never heard about this statute. When did it become law? Well, the Marchman Act, in one form or another, has been on the books since 1993, but nobody was talking about it. And so all of a sudden, I started getting all these phone calls. Well, in February of 16, I sat down in the local library here, which is where I opened up my law firm, because I had no money to start a law firm, but they had free Wi-Fi. It was very comfortable, and the coffee was half decent in the cafeteria. I got these really cheap business cards made from Vistaprint, and I ran around to treatment centers, I think for at least 2 months, handing out my card, introducing myself to people. I'd make coffee appointments, lunch appointments. I would talk to anybody that wanted to hear what I had to say. And not only had I not practiced law for several years, but before I worked for How to Manage, I'd lived in California for 3 years. So I'd just come back to Florida. Nobody even knew I was here. Mm-hmm. So I took all kinds of different cases, Kerry. I took, criminal cases. I took family law cases, which I co-counseled with a friend from law school because it wasn't really an area that I had a great deal of competence in. I took represented a student athlete who got himself in a bit of hot water with a female student, and that paid some bills. It was enough for me to get a really small office. So for the first year, I had a tiny office, just a little bit bigger than the desk that was sitting in it. In 2017, I met my wife. She's now my wife. That part of my life took a little bit longer to take responsibility for. And my wife had a background in guardianship. She had lived up in Massachusetts for a dozen years and practiced guardianship work up there. And we figured, we could probably use that guardianship statute, which was traditionally used for elderly people, for some of the clients that we had. Now, to top it all off, 11 months in, I lost my dad. And 2 days after I lost my dad, I had a family member that got sucked into Florida's mental health system. So when I tell people that the work is close and personal, it really is. And I had a best friend who had a sister that went on a coke binge for 3 days. And then he had a brother-in-law that hung himself after becoming addicted to pills. And just recently, he lost his sister-in-law because she overdosed. So I had a lot of people that were close to me and continue to be close to me that have these issues. And really for the next 6 years, really until year 7, it was just me and my wife doing everything, the sales, the marketing, meeting with the clients, drafting all the legal pleadings and running to court, all of it. And just the last 2.5 years, because we're coming up on our 10th anniversary in February of 26, we've been hiring staff. The business really took off, and there's now 14 of us in the team. So that means I can sit here with you, Kerry, and my phone doesn't ring too much, right? I don't have to run to court. I don't have to wear a shirt and tie. And so we're helping a lot of people, but my goal for next year is to help even more, because I think we're in the middle of, possibly maybe one of the worst crises we've faced, not just as a country, but as a people. I mean, mental health is rampant. COVID, we legalized marijuana here in Florida, and that has shifted our cases from these primary alcohol and recreational drug cases to primary, clinically challenging mental health cases, and they're really severe. And we have represented lawyers, we have put lawyers into treatment, I've represented judges, we have put some celebrities in treatment. I mean, just the last week we had calls, about various celebrities that were here in Florida that were having all kinds of issues.
Mhm.
Um, and so, it's become a real labor of love. And, I think my mission now, the first 7 years, I think my mission was running to court and fighting the good fight. I now have two associates to do that. So now the mission has really sort of shifted in terms of what my role is, from doing all the work to, okay, how do I spread the word even more? How do I tick off the guy down south even more? Because that means I'm helping more people. So that's the goal, to help as many people as we can next year.
I
Um,
love that. And I love that when you started your business, the fact that you talked, and because it's not for everybody, I think you would agree. And the fact that you kind of really bootstrapped it. And that just goes to show, I've told people as well, some of the attorneys that are like, yeah, I've been wanting to go out on my own, but they're afraid to make that leap and they feel like they need to have a full op. And I'm like, there's so many different options out there. And I bootstrapped my business from the get-go. So many people do that, and I'm glad that you shared that, and you've done it successfully, and that's wonderful.
yeah,
But I do agree with you. I think and especially mental health within the legal industry. There's a reason why the State Bar Association. You're down in Boca. I'm up here close to Tallahassee, and there's a reason why we have, it's like, what, I think 2 pages on the bar site talking about mental health and wellness and stress management and you know
yeah.
um
That's also become a passion of mine. I became a Florida bar CLE provider. So I do CLEs pretty regularly in different parts of the state and sometimes on
Mhm.
Zoom. And I always talk to the lawyers about that. I mean, the Florida bar, to their credit, is really, really good at helping lawyers that have an issue and who come to the bar and say, I need help. They will
Mhm.
bend over backwards. But if you don't get help, and if you touch that trust account, you're done. Just
Yeah.
mail the card back. You're out the game for at least 5 years. No, there's no getting around. You're done. And I tell lawyers that. And I represented a lawyer. It was a husband and wife, and I represented her.
Mhm.
He was the respondent, and I filed 2 cases against him. And I told her, you got to get control of that trust account, because you know what happens if he touches it. You're both getting disbarred, and
Mhm.
then you can't put food on the table for your children.
Yeah. Now, I know you've worked a lot too, hospitals and different facilities for violating patients' rights. What patterns or issues do you see the most frequently in these types of cases? Is there like a pattern that you kind of see?
Yeah. So that that sort of good fight. My first real exposure to that was when as I mentioned, I lost my dad, and 2 days after that, I had a family member that was Baker acted, and I
Yeah.
was there with the police, the paramedics. It was just a disaster. And then during COVID, other lawyers started to call me because their clients were getting Baker acted, and sort of most people said, "Oh, there's nothing you can do. You're Baker acted," and that I didn't think that was true. I mean, we're lawyers. We live in the gray. There's always a fight to be had if you go looking for it.
Mhm.
And so I started getting those calls. And fast forward now, I've been, filing habeas petitions really for the last 5 years. I think I've filed probably about 700 of them all over the state. And there are clusters of facilities that just seem to repeatedly violate, rights. They're happy to detain people illegally. They're happy to cut people off from their families. They're happy to coerce and threaten and cajole people into signing voluntary admission agreements when the statute's very clear about informed consent. But there's two problems with the Baker Act, and it's why it's so easy for these facilities to do it. Number one, once you get Baker Acted, nobody actually knows you're there. So what I mean by that is, in our criminal system, and when I was a young prosecutor, I had to cover what's known as first appearance. So if you get arrested, you probably know what I'm talking about, right? But for those that have never practiced in the criminal arena, if you get arrested and taken to the county jail, if for whatever reason either you cannot post the scheduled bond or it's a non-bondable offense, domestic violence, for instance, right, or even a DUI, if it's a non-bondable offense, within 24 hours, you have to, be brought before a judge to address three things. Number one, probable cause. Was the arrest even legal? Number two, your right to counsel. So even if you have the funds for private counsel, the court's probably going to appoint the public defender just for that hearing. so that you get some initial counsel. And then three, what are reasonable conditions of release? Because you're presumed innocent and it costs a lot of money to house people. So we want to make sure they are released. We want to make sure that, if we need to have a no contact order, we can have that. And maybe there needs to be a monetary bond, but we want to make sure they come back so the case continues to move through the system. So you get all of that built in due process by statute. Well, you get Baker acted, at least for the first 72 hours, you don't get any due process, none of it. And there's no oversight. Well, if there's no oversight, and because the facilities are, most of them are private for profit, but they are licensed as agents of the state's mental health system, which means they enjoy sovereign immunity, just like any other state actor. Well, if nobody knows you're there and they basically cannot be sued, then what is the motivation for them to follow the statute? Arguably none. Right? I mean, obviously, if you get injured, and I've had people beaten up, I had a woman that was sexually assaulted, that's different because they do have a duty to keep you safe, right? But as a general rule, if they keep you illegally or they coerce you to sign an informed consent document, you're not getting any money out of this. I get 3 or 4 calls a day from people that want to sue, and I wish I could do it because I'd have been retired years ago. But you cannot sue the facilities. You might have some kind of federal tort claim, but I don't think there's any great money in that, and it's a lengthy litigation. And probably the only one who's going to make any money out of that at the end of the day is probably the lawyer. So as a general rule, I mean, it's very easy and it's very sort of incentive laden for the facility to violate patients' rights. So I'm a big believer that even if the detention is legal, you should fight like hell to get out as quickly as you possibly can. And, that has become a real mission of mine, primarily because it happened to me. And because it's happening to so many other people. We Baker Act about 100,000 people every year here in Florida.
Wow.
It's insane, right?
That's
and I get calls from people that came here on holiday and ended up getting sucked into the system, and now they can't get out. So
wow. Those numbers are, I never knew it was that high. So when families call you, they have a loved one that's in trouble, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that most people who call you have about like either the treatment or recovery process?
So a couple of things. I think number one, I think people don't realize that recovery is a journey. It's not necessarily a destination, right? And what I mean by that is the idea that you could put somebody in treatment, say, for a very brief period of time, like 30 days, and then they're going to be fine for the rest of their life. I mean, that's just not realistic. And, so part of our triaging process is to have an honest and open conversation with the client about what they can expect. And we tell them, look, it's probably a year-long journey. Doesn't mean we're getting hired for the whole year, although if it's a guardianship case and we're probably going to be out, counsel a record probably for the year while this person's going through the recovery journey. But as a general rule, I mean, we tell families, you're probably thinking 3 to 6 months of a combination of residential and partial hospitalization, followed up by some kind of continuum of care, 12 steps, going to meetings, getting a sponsor, maybe living at a recovery residence and continuing with some type of outpatient services. Because we just know from experience, if you can keep somebody in recovery for a year, great chance they maintain recovery for the rest of their life, which is the goal. We want to get it right the first time. And I think, when people hear that, they say, wow, that's a long time. It is. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not. And considering you've been dealing with this for the last 5 or 10 years, right? You've been in literal hell and your family is being destroyed by this. Then what's another year? And by the way, this is a year for the family to heal too, because by the time they come to us, I mean, they're tired, they're traumatized, they probably spent a lot of money. Yeah. And while their loved ones in treatment, it's a time for them to heal. And we really encourage that. So I think that's one of the misnomers. I think the other thing, and I laugh about this, is some families will call and they get frustrated by sometimes how slow the wheels of justice move, right? Yeah. And Kerry, I don't get to call the judge. Your Honor, when's my hearing, right? That's not a good way to upset the judge. And I've had clients say, well, can you not call the judge? No, I'm not allowed to call the judge. There's a process, right? We are going through the legal system. And even if I file a case as an emergency, it might take 3 to 5 days, depending on the court's docket, to get a hearing. And I had one client who decided that maybe he should call the judge,
Oh
which he did.
no.
And I got a nasty
Oh.
email from the JA saying, you do know, Mr. Astor, that the judge cannot speak to your client, and perhaps you need to have that conversation with him about, an ex parte communication. So I think and I understand the clients feel that way. I mean, they're spending a good deal of money with us, and they want it done quickly. But we're lawyers, and we're governed by a very strict code of conduct,
Yeah.
right? Procedurally, how do we conduct ourselves in front of the court, but obviously ethically too. And I can only move as fast as the clerk accepts the file, and the JA sets the case for a hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that can be frustrating for clients. But listen, this is our system, and I've been in front of judges all over the state, and as a general rule, I think we have some really, really good judges here in Florida, and they care about getting it right and setting the cases as quickly as their docket will allow. And I have to tell clients that.
Yeah. Going back to the Baker Act numbers, because again, those were again very high. For anybody else that's tuning in, because obviously we have attorneys, but other people stumble upon the show that are non-attorneys. For those that are listening who may not fully understand the Baker Act, what are some of the key signs that somebody's being wrongfully held? Are there a couple of signs they should look out for?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what people need to understand is what the Baker Act is and what it's not. So the Baker Act is not a treatment statute, and I get calls pretty frequently saying, "Oh, I'd like to Baker Act my loved one." Well, why do you want to do that? Well, I want to get them into treatment. Then don't Baker Act them, because that's not what it is. It is a statute that specifically authorizes the state of Florida to take custody of somebody and make that person a ward of the state, and the state becomes the new legal guardian, and to basically restrict their freedom. So as opposed to the county jail, it's a lockdown, secured behavioral health facility where the doors are locked and you cannot leave. Really no different from the county jail, except obviously nobody knows you're there. But I think some of the red flags are, and I've seen this is happen frequently, where somebody may potentially have gone to the hospital for some type of medical care.
Mm-hmm.
This happened a lot during COVID. And, if they had health insurance, and not all, I want to preface this by saying not all hospitals and Baker facilities are bad, but there is a cluster of them that we see over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And these, bad actors, if somebody goes in there, and they have health insurance, a lot of the time, somehow they'll end up on either in front of a psychiatrist or it's done on an iPad, like a telehealth conference. And, the magic question they like to ask is, have you ever thought about harming yourself? And if they answer, yeah, they're going to get detained. Almost certainly. I see that a lot. But, a lot of things I see is what happens is the family gets cut off from their loved one. They're prevented from having any phone contact with them. They cannot go to visit them. Even now, facilities are saying, well, it's COVID. COVID's been long gone, right? You can't come in to visit. And they basically try to disconnect the person. Or they say, well, we'd like to medicate your loved one. Would you consent to that? And if you say no, well, then they may just do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So things of that nature, or things like I've seen, and I call it, what was the term I just used? I did a video on it. Moving the proverbial goalposts.
Mm-hmm.
And the facility will say, they'll be out on Monday. It's Friday. We'll be out on Monday. Monday comes, and you know what? The doctor, took a look at your loved one. They're not stabilized, probably tomorrow, and they string them along. So that happens. Or they tell their loved one, we're not allowed to release them on the weekend if the 72 hours expires on the weekend. That's not true. What is true is that if the 72 hours expires on a Saturday or a Sunday, and if Monday's a holiday, it rolls over until the next calendar day. So it's not that they can't release the person on a weekend, because I've gotten plenty of people out on a weekend. It's that they don't want to, because they get those days for free. And it's more time for them to bill the insurance. And so, I mean, those are just some of the things that happen. Or one other thing I see is the person went on an involuntary basis, and somehow they magically signed a voluntary admission agreement, which is the second type of Baker Act we have here in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And the facility say, oh, your loved one is agreed to stay. Well, what do you mean they agreed to stay? They called us to hire a lawyer. Yeah, they signed this voluntary consent this morning.
Mm.
No, that's not what happened. They got threatened and coerced, and they did not give informed consent, which is what the statute requires. And now there's no clock ticking and no requirement for due process. And so those are some of the things that I see. I mean, it's just really crazy,
Is this part
really
of
crazy.
what fuels your dedication to all of this, is seeing these injustices? Is that part of what makes you keep going?
You know what, it does. In some ways, I feel like a prosecutor again because I get to go in there and and really hand these facilities their hats. When I first started doing this work, Kerry, they never heard of me, and I was driving all over the state doing these hearings.
Mhm.
Some of them were hearings on the habeas petition, and some of them were placement hearings. But you do a dozen of these things, and you have a little fun with the doctor, and all of a sudden they decide they don't want to be embarrassed again in front of the court.
Mhm.
And so I would say at this point, most of them don't go to a hearing. Some of them do, but not maybe 1 out of 10, because they know who we are. They know we'll fight. And my two associates I have are both very skilled in the courtroom. And, I mean, we know the Baker Act really, really well. So they don't normally want to mess with us. But every once in a while, I'll get a new facility that wants to tango with us. So, I was
You're
in
ready to
Sarasota.
dance, right?
Yeah, I was exactly. I was in Sarasota a couple of weeks ago on a case. I was able to get it resolved. Once I appeared, I was able to get it resolved, and they got the person out within a couple of days. But I think when I was a prosecutor, I mean, in 5 years, I tried 200 jury trials. I was a machine. I was in trial all the time, and so I think that when you're always trying cases, um, people know. Listen, if Astor has to go to trial, he will. If he can resolve it with you, he'll do that too. Because I want to be fair, and you want to give your client that option of, not rolling the dice. But yeah, I mean, we're going to fight. If we have to, we will fight.
Yeah.
Um,
And when
so,
you were going to court, because of course I have to ask you this because the show's called Chromatic Counsel, but when you were going to court a lot, did you have certain colors that you would wear or certain outfits? Or even like when you were meeting with clients in these facilities, did you have kind of like certain colors that you liked to wear or you felt were more calming for the people you were dealing with?
that's a really interesting question. I'm having a flashback. You know what? I like to wear a red tie. See
Yeah.
how you're wearing red? I used to wear a red tie like that. And there is something to that. And I think maybe even subconsciously, I think that sort of signified to everybody that I was prepared to fight.
Yeah.
I know they say blue is a calming color, um, but I always wore a red tie. I don't know why. Um, but I think I
It
think
lets
that
them know you mean business. Yeah.
yeah, I meant business. But look, I'm always open to resolving a case. I mean, I don't fight for the sake of fighting.
Yeah.
If you can take the path of least resistance and come to a resolution that works for the client, because ultimately it's the client that makes the decision, not the lawyer,
Mhm.
then great. I'm good with that. If everybody gets a little bit of a win, and my client gets to go home within a very brief period of time, as opposed to getting sent to a state hospital for 6 months.
Mhm. And
So
you as an attorney, your own wellness practices, because obviously you participate, like I was like, I saw Krav Maga and I'm like, yes, I do that too. What has been the biggest impact on your ability to handle these cases? Because obviously it's hard to shut it off. I
it
think it is
is.
for any attorney, but
Yeah. It's funny, well, Kerry, I don't know about you, but when I went to law school, I remember I think my first torts class, and professor said, we're going to teach you to think like lawyers. We're going to turn that switch on. But what he didn't tell me, and I don't think they tell any lawyer, is that once they turn that switch on, you can't turn it off.
Mhm.
You can't turn it off. So, and I think if you care about the work that you do, then I think it is hard to turn it off. So, you know, for a long time, I was working 7 days a week, and I had to back that off a little bit. I still work at least six. I can't help myself because the phone's ringing and someone needs help. I want to help them. It's
Mhm.
just, it's what I do, and it really did save me in many, many ways. Um, I think a couple of things. One, I try to other than the craft thing, I try to get into the gym 4 days a week, and I go early,
Mhm.
before I've had anything to eat. I think I try to prioritize sleep, although this week that's been a problem. I try to make sure I get enough sleep and enough rest. And if it means taking a nap on a Saturday afternoon, I'll
Mhm.
do it. My wife is very understanding of that. Um, and I've just tried to be a little bit more careful about what I put in my body. I've noticed as I've gotten older, I
Mhm.
just can't eat like I did in college. It just doesn't work for me. So now, I mean, I have 2 meals a day. I have, brunch or lunch, and I have dinner. And that's it. I stopped snacking during the day. I stopped drinking coffee in the afternoon because it was affecting my sleep. I try to stay hydrated, um, and just take care of myself. The other thing I try to do is I try not to watch too much news. Right. I try to block out as much of the noise as I can because I think that is a terrible distraction.
Mhm.
And listen, whoever's in power, it's not going to affect my ability to help people.
Mhm.
Right. And I think if you allow it to sidetrack you and you get caught up on all of the BS that's, circulates with politics,
Mhm.
I think you can lose focus and it can affect you, right?
Mhm.
It really can. So I try not to watch too much. And I also try to spend a bit of quality time with my wife. She's my best friend, and she's also my law partner. And I couldn't have done any of this without her. So we try to spend some quality time together. I try to take her out on a date at least once a week.
Oh,
And I think that's important too. Although we do talk about work at dinner, but at least we're out of the work universe, and
absolutely.
we're having some
Yeah.
quality time together, which is important. So
Great. Well, Mark, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on the show
welcome.
today and for sharing your journey and what you do. For those of you who want to connect directly with Mark, there is a link in the show notes below. So you can click on the link and go directly to his site and connect with him. And I hope that we can have you back on to talk a little bit more and just, cover a few other things and within the industry and what's going on here in Florida as well. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Kerry.
And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. That is a wrap for this episode of Chromatic Counsel. And if you liked what you heard today, I hope you will hit the like button. Share this episode with one attorney who needs a little bit more color in their life and needs to hear a little bit more about another attorney's story. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you know when we go live and when we upload new episodes. I want to wish you all a wonderful holiday if I don't see you before then. Wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. And as always, I am wishing you continued success.